Now let's move on to shutter speed. Let's talk about what shutter speed is and what its role is in exposure.
So shutter speed is, well, it's the speed at which the shutter in your camera opens and closes. And I think on most cameras these days, you can have it be as short as 1/10,000th of a second. And then most digital cameras, due to sensor overheating, have capped your shutter speed being open at its longest at 30 seconds.
So you can go from 1/10,000th of a second, much faster than you can blink your eye, up to 30 seconds. And you can actually do longer, which I imagine you'll talk about, but the workaround to if you need more than 30 seconds. But so that's quite a range. Okay.
Absolutely. So I talked about doing night photography, and with night photography, I was doing almost all 30-second exposures, and sometimes beyond that using a shutter release, which is probably a topic for another time. So if you're making photos of a person, if you're doing portraits, you're going to want to have a relatively fast shutter speed.
Why?
Because it freezes movement.
Because as much as we want to stand still or sit still, we're always moving a little bit, right?
Yeah, and I never actually paid attention to the fact that it's impossible to sit completely still. Never knew that until I started doing photography, because if you take a photo of somebody with too long of a shutter speed, it will be blurry because as a human, you can't sit completely still.
Yeah.
So if you're doing portrait work, depending, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but depending on what your aperture is, you're going to want to use the fastest shutter speed that you can and still let the right amount of light in to get the exposure that you're looking for.
So if you want to freeze the action, you want either you have a fast moving subject, you're trying to do a portrait of a little kid who is moving around a lot, or you're at a basketball game or a hockey game and you want to get a picture, you need as fast of a shutter speed as you can in those light conditions.
Yep, because if you've got a football player running past you, or you're at a motorcycle race or a car race or something, you're going to have that 1/10,000th of a second shutter speed if you want to stop whatever you're shooting in the frame, because otherwise it'll just end up being blurry.
Or even things that aren't moving that fast. Like I've taken pictures at events where there's somebody speaking and they're speaking in a microphone, they move their hands like this. You may get their face in focus, but their hand blurs through the frame, and that's not a good look. It doesn't look like a professional photo.
Absolutely. Even in that situation, which I've also been in many times, probably standing right next to you, you do need, a good 500th or 1,000th of a second to stop that without any motion blur, in my opinion.
So there's times when you would want a fast shutter speed to stop the motion. So that's one thing a fast shutter speed can do. Are there times when you would want motion or blur in your picture?
Yeah, absolutely. Take that same motorcycle race. Instead of stopping everything in the frame, maybe you want to do a pan shot. So you shoot at a little bit of a lower shutter speed and you pan your camera across with the car and you have the car in focus, but everything else is blurry. Or you're looking for, if somebody's running, you can still get most of their body and their face in focus, but their arms or legs are blurred out,
Yeah. Another example I like that I use a lot when I do concert photography is the shutter drag method, which is a topic for another time, but where you do a very slow shutter speed and use a flash to freeze the motion and get the trails of light to capture some of the energy in a concert type situation.
For sure. Yes, we could probably have an entire episode about light trails and light painting and all of that fun stuff.
Let's do it. Okay, so shutter speed helps determine how much of the image is frozen and is clear and crisp versus if there's going to be some blur. And in a lot of cases, maybe in most cases that beginner photographers would do, you're going to want to freeze the action, and so you're going to need a faster shutter speed. If you think about it like a curtain opening to let the light in and then close the curtain back, it's the least amount of time possible for that. But there are cases, as Phil just talked about, where you want some blur on purpose, and then you would slow down the shutter speed a little bit. So we've talked about real world applications like sports. When sports where things are moving fast, you want a really fast shutter speed. Low light situations where you need to let as much light in as possible, you're going to want a much slower shutter speed. You want that curtain to be open much longer to let more light in to get a proper exposure. Night photography similarly, and light trails similarly. Okay. Any other real world applications, or does that pretty much cover it?
I think that covers it.